Hey y'all, I'm Mark. I'm a recovered drug addict and alcoholic. I've been sober since November 27th of 2012. And this is my third video in a series of videos on drug addiction and alcoholism. If you haven't seen the other two videos, go ahead and check them out and like and subscribe and do all the YouTube stuff that people do. Share them with family members, friends, people struggling with alcoholism and addiction. I just want to get the word out and try and help as many people as possible with this thing. So that being said, the third topic of this series of videos is going to be surrounding some questions that I received on social media. I put out just kind of a blanket, hey, what do you guys want me to talk about next statement? And I got a bunch of questions thrown my way, and I'm going to do my best to try and answer some of those questions in this video. I guess if I had to put an umbrella topic on it, I'm going to be talking mostly about some of the things that the treatment industry is doing wrong, and the medical professionals, as much as I hate to say that, are doing wrong in the industry that's actually doing a lot more damage than good. So that being said, I'll just get right into the first, question topic. Well, before I do that, I should probably say that a lot of this is my opinion. I understand that opinions can be controversial. I understand that certain opinions are not beyond reproach. And if you'd like to have a discussion about some of these things or have some feedback for me, go ahead and put a comment in the comment section or reach out to me on social media. Okay, so all that being said, the first thing I guess I'd like to get right into is medication-assisted therapy. Or MAT, as people like to call it. Or you could just put a bigger umbrella on it and call it harm reduction. And so there's this idea out there that because of the rate of drug addiction and alcoholism fatalities, that we need to meet drug addicts and alcoholics in the middle, and we need to find solutions to stop the death from rising. And I would agree with that. I would agree sometimes with that. So I'll get into the first thing that people usually bring up, and that is going to be needle exchanges. So for those that don't know or are uninformed, they have various states have put in place programs for drug addicts to exchange needles, trade in dirty ones for clean ones, so that they don't get infected with HIV or Hep C after sharing a needle with someone. I'm generally for these, but under a couple conditions. I don't think that we should just give out free needles. I think that's setting the bar really, really low, and I think we can do so much more. I think that at these various sites, we should have people stationed, recovered drug addicts and alcoholics volunteering their time to try and speak with individuals who are trying to exchange needles. Not forced. I don't want them to, trade out a couple needles and then they have to go talk to someone. Basically, every time you pick up your needles, it's mentioned, hey, there's a couple people here who have a solution for drug addiction. And if you'd like to talk to them, they're certainly available. They're right over there. I think that has to be in place. And it's not in place enough. Most of them are just simply, you're in, you're out. It's not really necessarily the most helpful thing, although it does reduce the spread of various bloodborne pathogens, I guess we'll say. The next part of harm reduction is going to be a bit more controversial than that past statement. Medication-assisted therapy. Medication-assisted therapy can be helpful. I also think in most cases it's not. Now, I guess before I get really into it, there's just a couple things that you should know. There's a lot of different medications that are used in medication-assisted therapy. You've got Antabuse for alcohol. That'll make you vomit if you intake alcohol. Then you've also got the opiate blockers, or I guess the rest of them are opiate blockers. You have Suboxone, which blocks your opiate receptors. You have Subutex, which is essentially the same thing as Suboxone, just slightly different. You have Methadone, Also blocks opiate receptors. And then you have injectables like Vivitrol or Suboxone. These all basically act on the opiate receptors in the brain, and basically they overtake the opiate receptor so that nothing can bind to the opiate receptor and produce euphoria. So I have pretty much problems with all of these. The antabuse, I'm not really a fan of antabuse, specifically because you just don't take it and then you can drink. Basically, if you take it and you intake alcohol, you will get sick. So the quick workaround for that is don't take it. Now, it might be useful for someone who would fall under the category of hard drinker, or someone who basically just needs consequences to learn their lesson and stop or moderate. It would be helpful in that sense. But for someone who has had sufficient consequences and has been unable to stop in light of those consequences, antabuse is not going to be effective in treating alcoholism or really even helping with alcoholism. Although it's oftentimes thrown out by medical professionals, sometimes simply because it's one of the only options that medical professionals can throw out when they're asked about it, and they have to throw it out, lest they just say there's nothing that we can do. Then you have the opiate blockers. I guess I'll go through each of those. Methadone, just stay away from methadone. Don't do methadone, in my opinion. Reason being is methadone itself is highly addicting. Methadone is a narcotic. You're essentially trading, and all of these opiate blockers, by the way, are going to be narcotics. You're trading one opiate for another opiate, although it's slightly different in in its chemical nature and chemical structure, of course. But methadone will create severe health problems down the road. It basically creates lots of bone problems down the road. And also in itself, like I said, is heavily addicting. And also, just kind of keep in mind with any of these is if you don't have them, it is likely that you will return to your drug of no choice. Also, methadone becomes a currency on the streets really easily for loved ones that don't know. People trade and sell methadone for heroin, or they just straight up sell methadone to other people who take methadone to get high, because methadone does get you high if you have no opiate tolerance. Some of the other drawbacks of methadone too is you usually have to get it dispensed from a clinic, which means that you have to be at this clinic oftentimes very early in the morning, 4 or 5 a.m. You wait in line and you get it dispersed every single day to you. And oftentimes these people that are taking methadone, they're not really vetted, meaning that their cases aren't really gone through with a fine-tooth comb to see if they're engaging in other psychological measures in order to make some changes in their life that would basically render drugs and alcohol not necessary anymore. I guess I could say, if you want to be on methadone for the rest of your life, that's your own individual endeavor. However, I will say with all of these, just kind of know that the reason I have this opinion is because there is a better way that requires honestly less effort in the long run, less money in the long run, and that is tackling your mental health. So I'll get into the other ones. You've got Suboxone and Subutex. I'll lump those two together. Basically, you take a pill every day. It blocks your opiate receptors. This one also can be circumvented by not taking the medication. It's highly expensive. It's highly expensive on the streets as well. It was originally invented to help with detox symptoms, and it has since been branded by pharmaceutical companies, for better or for worse, for long-term use. You can take it and still get high on other opiates. You just have to do more opiates. Drug addicts know this, heroin addicts know this, and generally what they do is they just use more than they should while they're on the Suboxone, which can lead to an overdose. Remember, these medications just stop the euphoria, not the effects of the drugs themselves. I'm not a fan of Suboxone long-term maintenance, simply because I have not seen it be effective long-term. Usually people that I meet or encounter they end up going back to their drug of no choice pretty quickly. I mean, all it takes is, oh, I'm on vacation and I forgot to fill my script, or oh, I don't have enough money this month, or oh, I had a lapse in my insurance, and then these people are completely screwed. Also, the way that the Suboxone long-term maintenance is set up is you're supposed to be seeing a psychologist and taking drug tests weekly, although that rarely happens from what I've seen. Usually they have plans in place where you have these things set up in order to get the medication to move you away from being dependent on the medication, and that just isn't really heavily vetted and checked in on as frequently as it should be. So thusly it becomes, you just end up taking a drug to circumvent another drug. I'm not sure where the logic is in that. Then you have things like Vivitrol and Suboxone. These are injectables you take once a month. Basically, it takes that same chemical that is in Suboxone and puts it in your system more long-term and blocks all your opiate receptors for up to a month. Also, not a fan of these because there is another solution, but also because a real drug addict and alcoholic, they'll just switch to something else. I've seen opiate addicts turn into methamphetamine addicts. I've seen them turn to Xanax. Most heroin addicts are big fans of cocaine or crack or alcohol or Xanax. I mean, and that Vivitrol does nothing to affect those other drugs. So what I see a lot of the time is basically just a new addiction appear. The other thing with that is with Vivitrols, it's not a guarantee. Believe it or not, I've seen drug addicts or alcoholics try and shoot past the Vivitrol shot or the Suboxone shot, and they end up overdosing. They don't get any euphoria. They don't get high at all. What ends up happening is their body is just shocked by the excess amounts of drugs that are now in their system, and they end up falling out and they end up passing away, or they end up overdosing. So not really the biggest fan of MAT therapy in really any situation or setting. I'd have to, of course, look at every individual case to make a full assessment, but just because there is an alternative out there, and the fact that people would want to, chase down the medication option is simply, to me, everyone just wants an easy out, right? They don't want to do the legwork or the footwork that it takes to maintain long-term sobriety. Everyone wants to just rely on a drug or a chemical, and they're not foolproof, and that's the thing, is they're not foolproof, and that's why I question them and I really worry about them. Not that they can't be helpful or useful, but you definitely have to scrutinize the hell out of them, essentially. So that kind of brings me to my next thing, which is someone I think had asked me, is the 12-step approach useful for everyone? And I would say it's not useful for two different types of people. Useful is kind of an interesting word to use, but I digress. The two types of people are, one, I mentioned earlier, hard drinkers, the person who can have consequences and learn their lesson. Those people do not need the 12 steps. Those people should just go see a therapist. They should go figure out their problems however they want to, however they choose to. Those people need to stay out of 12-step fellowships because, one, they don't need to. They probably can drink with some success or can moderate their drinking. And to have them in a 12-step fellowship actually does a disservice to the people that actually need the 12 steps, because they don't have to, we'll say, work the 12-step process with the same ferocity that someone who is actually a drug addict or alcoholic would need to. The second type of person who wouldn't benefit from the 12-step approach is going to be the person who's just not ready to hear it. A lot of people want to blame the 12 steps for not working, and I would say generally the person is not ready to engage upon that type of honesty, that type of responsibility, and that type of action. I would put it back on the individual. The reason I would do that is because there's nothing in the 12-step literature that really disagrees with anything clinical. So a lot of what we see in the 12 steps is what you're going to get presented in a therapeutic office, just utilized with different words by people who aren't necessarily 100% trained in, I guess, how to communicate effectively. So I don't really see a situation for the real drug addict and alcoholic where the 12 steps isn't a useful approach. Usually it's the own person's prejudices, biases, belief systems that stops them from engaging in mental health work, period, that blocks them off, not the 12 steps that tends to be the issue. And which I guess brings me into the next kind of question that came up, is someone asked me a question about, triggers and if they go away. And I have some issues with the word triggers, but to answer the question, do triggers go away? What I will tell you is that if you do the work necessary and work required, you will get to a place to where alcohol and drugs doesn't have an effect over you in the way that it used to. It will not have the same gravity, and you will be able to exist in this world without having the obsession to drink and use. It can be lifted. There's a solution for drug addiction and alcoholism. And I will tell you that it has nothing to do with writing down your trigger list. I will say that if you are sitting down with a clinician, and I have my own issues with clinicians. I think clinicians and mental health authorities have done more damage to drug addicts and alcoholics than help. That's not all of them. There's a lot of really good ones out there who really get it. And I love those people. But there's a lot of people who just don't understand and are just doing what they believe to be best with something they don't really have experience with outside of what they've learned through a textbook or in school. And so if you're sitting down with one of these people, they're most likely going to present you a trigger list. And they're going to talk to you about how you need to avoid or be on the lookout for these type of things and try not to engage in them. And then they'll send you on your merry way. You see this at a lot of 30-day treatment centers, or the treatment centers that just kind of run you through it, or a lot of IOPs will do this as some filler for their groups. And what I'll say is that the individual is solely responsible for how they perceive the world. There is nothing out there that makes you want to use. It all lies within the individual's own personal work. Basically, if a person has done enough work on themselves, nothing outside of them can affect them to the point to where they want to drink, or to where the obsession to drink returns. So the only time really a trigger list would be helpful is going, all right, what do we need to work on as far as my responses or my poor responses to life? This gives me stress, this gives me anxiety, this creates resentment in me. When I'm resentful, I want to drink. When I'm anxious, I want to drink. When I'm depressed, I want to drink. So then the therapist can go, all right, now we have our list of things that we need to address and work on. That's what we're going to do next, is we're going to tackle these issues so that when they come up, you're cool as a cucumber. You have no issues with them. And just to circle back around to my previous comment about the, mental health, is what we see a lot of the time is well-intentioned individuals giving horrible advice. There's not really much evidence to support that equine therapy or art therapy or trigger lists or some of these treatments are effective in treating addiction and alcoholism. What we have shown is that these therapies are helpful in a ton of other spaces, and in a ton of other ways, but to apply them directly to addiction and alcoholism is a bit irresponsible in my estimation, which I guess brings me to my last question, which is was mostly about mental health and 12-step work. Should they be joined together? And my answer to that is yes. You should be meeting with a psychiatrist or a psychologist, as well as meeting with a 12-step person when you're getting sober. And but one should come before the other. The 12 steps puts you in a position to where you can tackle a lot of those mental health issues. You do need to have both of those resources in play, but a lot of the times people aren't able to do proper therapy until they've done proper 12-step work, because they don't know how to be honest with themselves. They don't know about different ways to see the world. They don't know that a lot of their issues lie within themselves rather than the external world. And so a lot of people kind of put the cart before the horse, if you will, and they start engaging in mental health work before they're really ready to. And it puts them at a serious disadvantage. What I've seen be successful is going through the 12-step work and then slowly introducing clinical measures as you start to get the hang of the 12 steps. And then by the time you're through it, you can dive into all sorts of different modalities and learn all sorts of things. That's when equine therapy becomes helpful. That's when art therapy becomes helpful. But to try and kind of all smush them together too much, too fast can be really detrimental to drug addicts and alcoholics. So hopefully I've answered some of your questions this week about drug addiction and alcoholism. Probably do a more focused topic next week. This one was a little bit more rambling and opinion-based, but I guess they're all opinion-based, to be honest. But thank you so much for joining me. Please leave a comment, like the video, share it with your friends, do whatever you need to get the word out. Thanks so much.